Welcome to the Open Forum in the Villages, Florida podcast. In this show, we talk to leaders in the community, leaders of clubs, and interesting folks who live here in the Villages to get perspectives of what is happening here in the Villages, Florida. We are a listener-supported podcast. There will be shout-outs for supporters in episodes. In Season 6, we will continue making substantial improvements to the podcast.
This is Mike Roth. And listeners, I'm thrilled to share with you this podcast, which is my passion project for you. This podcast brings me joy, brings you knowledge, inspiration, and a lot of things that people need to know about the Villages and the people living here. Be sure to hit the follow button to get the newest episode each week. Creating this podcast is a labor of love, even though it demands more time that I can easily spare. Now, here's where you come in. You can help us keep the podcast alive and thriving. How? By becoming a supporter. The easy way for you to support us is to visit our podcast webpage, openforuminthevillagesflorida.com, and click on the supporter button at the top of the page, or the purple supporter box on the right side of the page. Even a small donation of $3 to $10 a month makes a big difference. And guess what? You can cancel your subscription at any time. No strings attached. Your support means the world to us. Stay curious, stay inspired, and keep those headphones on. I hope everyone enjoys today's show. I'm here today with Duane Roemmich. Duane is a professional sales and marketing executive, and he's worked in the consumer and industrial markets. Duane retired in 2013 and moved to the Villages. He became an honor flight volunteer in 2015 in the fundraising area. Then he became the fundraising coordinator and moved to the PR coordination in 2021. Today, Duane is in the honor flight management team and has been a guardian and squad leader on many flights. Thanks for joining me today, Duane.
Morning.
Duane, why don't you tell our audience who doesn't know what honor flight is, a little bit about what honor flight does?
I'll be happy to do that. If you step back in time and think of 2004, in 2004, the World War II Memorial was going to be dedicated in Washington, D.C. after a lot of hard work by many people. And there was a gentleman named Earl Morris, who was a retired Air Force captain, working as a physician assistant at the VA clinic in Dayton, Ohio. And most of his clients were World War II veterans, so he would be talking to them during the time they spent together and saying, boy, you must be pretty excited about going to the World War II Memorial. And for a majority of his patients, they had no family and or they didn't have any money and weren't going to be going. So he felt pretty bad about that, given the sacrifices that generation made. So he was a member of a pilots club. And he approached the members of his pilots club and said, look, this is really unfair. I've got a couple patients here who would love to be able to go to D.C., but they're not going to be able to do that. Can some of you join me in wanting to fly them back to Washington, D.C. at no cost? And about 6 of them said yes. So in 2005, there really was the first flight of honor flight back to Washington, D.C. and showed the veterans around, and everybody had a great time, and he said, hey, I want to expand it. In 2005, there was a gentleman named Jeff Miller in North Carolina, and he was not in the service, but a lot of his relatives were. And he owned a number of dry cleaning businesses, and he heard about this honor flight. He said, this is a great idea, but I'd like to maybe make a bigger deal than flying individual little planes. So he chartered a plane and took a large number of veterans back to D.C., the same type of format, and he called his organization Honor Air. Well, in 2006, both Earl Morris and Jeff Miller got together and say, hey, let's pool our collective intellectual resources and our concern about veterans. And they formed an organization, a nonprofit called Honor Flight Network. So since that time, there's approximately 130 hubs around the country that do the same thing. Fly veterans for free back to Washington, D.C. to honor them for their services. And so now we move into honor flight here in the Villages. How did that start? So there was a gentleman, a retired Army veteran named Mark Freudlich, who in 2011 said, I've heard about this organization, Honor Flight. It's a great organization. We have a lot of veterans in the villages, and I'd like to start a hub here. So in 2011, the Villages Honor Flight was started as a 501c3 nonprofit. The first flight was really in 2012 and flew the first set of veterans. So fast forward from 2012 up until May of this year, we've flown over 2,400 veterans for free back to Washington, D.C.
How many flights was that?
We're now starting our 63rd flight, which will be later in the year. So we average around 3 to 4 flights a year. And then we have something called a flightless, which I can talk about a little bit later.
The first time I ran into Honor Flight in reality was one late evening. At about 1 a.m., I was flying back into Cincinnati, maybe 15 years ago. And I get to the place where you exit the security area, and there were about 150 people yelling and screaming, carrying on with flags. And I'm saying, what the heck is this going on?
Yeah.
And then I realized that was a reception for the Honor Flight honorees going back to Cincinnati that day.
Yes. It's a very moving experience, by the way.
Right. They were a very motivated crowd. At 1 a.m., I said, wow, this has got to be something. Now, who is eligible to participate in the Honor Flight program?
If you think about veteran, it's really any veteran that served at least one day in the service, doesn't matter what service, and was discharged honorably. That's it. That's it. And as far as the veterans go, as I mentioned earlier, we're 501c3, so we're a nonprofit. We do not charge the veteran anything. They fly for free. And so because of that, we're constantly doing a lot of fundraising activities in the villages, raising money. Probably about 50% of the funds that come into us are due to fundraising activities that we do as an organization. Probably another 25% are from other organizations and businesses in the villages area that will do fundraising and then donate money to us. And then probably the last 25% are people through their estates or individual. A lot of times after someone has gone on a flight, their family will make a donation. Okay. So we're always out raising money. And
so you're flying on commercial aircraft?
We fly on commercial aircraft now. We used to actually fly on commercial up until about 3 years ago. And then we decided for better utilization of time and space, we would charter. So we charter now. Right now, it's Allegiant Airlines out of Sanford. And the way the flights work is we meet at the American Legion Post at about 1 o'clock, about 1 o'clock, 1:30 in the morning. We get together, kind of go over what the day is going to be looking like. Then we transport them by bus down to Sanford. And we have breakfast, not gourmet, halfway decent breakfast. We'll probably leave for BWI around 6:30 in the morning. We get into BWI, then we get on buses again, and then we spend the day seeing the various monuments in the Washington, D.C. area. We'll drive by the Marine Corps Memorial. And we don't stop there because there's no restrooms. And as you can imagine, given we have a lot of older veterans and needing to use restrooms a lot, a place with no restrooms wouldn't work out.
Right.
Then we'll go to, depending upon the weather and time of the day, we'll go to Arlington National Cemetery, and we will observe the ceremonies there. And typically, we have some veterans, not many anymore. They're in wheelchairs. So there's a special area set up at Arlington for veterans in wheelchairs, which is a really good location. So we will watch the ceremony, spend a little bit of time prior to that. People can walk around, see where Audie Murphy's grave is, some other things. Then once we get done with that, we will take off and go to lunch. Now, it used to be the Air Force Memorial, but they're doing some work and stuff over there, so we're working out where we will go for the next luncheon. Then we will go to the World War II Memorial, which is the largest back in Washington, D.C. We'll take photographs there of the group. And then people will basically go off as to where they'd like to spend the most amount of time. Vietnam veterans certainly would go to the Vietnam Memorial. Korean War veterans would go to Korean War Memorial. Some of the veterans would like to go to the Lincoln Memorial there. And when Honor Flight first started, and in the villages, there was a very high percentage of World War II vets. Unfortunately, they're passing away. Right now, we're probably looking at about 3 to 4% at the most World War II veterans on our flight.
Okay.
The largest now area is Korean War, and Vietnam is growing every year. Thinking about the idea of flights and aging veterans, in about 2014, Mark Fredlich, again, the one who started Honor Flight in the Villages, said there's a lot of vets, unfortunately, that due to illness, mobility issues, are not able to be on a flight for almost 24-hour day because it's a very long day. So Honor Flight was the first one in the country, the hub, to come up with something we call a flightless. So what we do on a flightless flight is we pick up the veterans at a more decent hour in the morning at the American Legion post, like about 9 o'clock. A lot of people are there cheering them on. And then we drive over to
Eisenhower.
And a lot of people over there waving flags and everything. And we basically have pretty much a half day of a virtual honor flight where there's a lot of video that shows them like being on an airplane, landing in Baltimore, going to each one of the memorials. And in between that, when we would have like a lunch break at D.C., we have a lunch break at
Eisenhower.
Because being a facility here offers some advantages, we'll normally bring in a speaker from the military.
Sure.
And then we will also give out awards to each member of their branch of service. We have a big green screen set up. So when they come in, they'll get together by squads, we call them, and they'll get photographs taken against the green screen. So what will happen is that green screen allows us to basically place them as if they were in Washington, D.C. So there's photographs at some point in time that we put together in a catalog and give out, and they'll feel like they're right there. Normally, we have about, say, 60, 65 veterans and guardians, which I'll talk about in a bit, on a flight. And for flightless, it depends, somewhere probably 30, 35 veterans and guardians. So we have 1 to 2 of those per year.
Veterans do you put on an average flight?
65 on a flight, about 65 veterans. And then in addition to...
And then you have your guardians, okay? And what does it cost you to put a flight together?
Probably about $80,000.
$80,000
$80,000
to charter the flight.
For the charter of the flight.
The buses.
And the buses and food.
The meals and...
All that kind of stuff. So it's not inexpensive.
No, it's...
Now, we're more fortunate than a number of the hubs, let's say on the West Coast, because when they do their trips, it's a 3-day trip. So their trips can cost $400,000. I'm very familiar with the hub in San Diego where I grew up. And so it's a 3-day trip and it's very expensive.
Mm-hmm. So if you have 60 veterans on a flight, how many guardians do you have?
Same amount. Every veteran has a guardian.
Oh, okay.
And the role of the guardian is really, one, to make sure that the veteran is safe throughout the entire process. And the second is to befriend the veteran. There's a lot of veterans, unfortunately, in the 5-county area that we draw from for veterans who don't have any family left or spouse has passed away. So this is one way for a veteran and a guardian to get to know each other. And for many guardians, and a lot of my vets, it's been a lifelong relationship. We get together for lunch, we get together for meetings, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And fortunately, we've never lost a veteran on any of our flights.
That's good. Let's take a break here and hear a Alzheimer's tip from Dr. Craig Curtis. Should people who want to reduce their risk of Alzheimer's and improve their brain health take something like Centrum Silver, which is advertised as a brain supplement?
Another great question, Mike. So in a study published last year, they actually showed that people that took a multivitamin such as Centrum Silver actually did slightly better on memory tests. And this was a double-blind, placebo-controlled study sponsored by the Alzheimer's Association. However, the Alzheimer's Association has come out and said, we still don't have enough information to recommend a daily multivitamin. There was a study that showed no effect of a daily multivitamin a few years back that was also a double-blind, placebo-controlled study. So we do have conflicting evidence on whether or not you should take a daily multivitamin.
But the question is, take a multivitamin if you have an unhealthy diet. If you have a healthy diet, get your vitamins from natural foods.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Thanks very much, Dr. Curtis.
Thank you for having me, Mike.
With over 20 years of experience studying brain health, Dr. Curtis's goal is to educate the Villages community on how to live a longer, healthier life. To learn more, visit his website, craigcurtismd.com, or call 352-500-5252 to attend a free seminar.
In your introduction, I said that you were a squad leader, and many of our people don't know exactly what that means relative to honor flight. Can you fill them in, Duane?
Sure. So like in the military, we break our groups up into squads. So there's tends to be 6 to 7 veterans, 6 to 7 guardians in each squad. And each squad has a squad leader. So the squad leader is responsible for that squad every time they're together. We have multiple meetings prior to the flight where people get a chance to know each other better. They can bring spouses or friends to get to know everybody else. So the squad leader sets up a luncheon. The squad leader will veteran also. So each guardian will develop a biography of their veteran. And how that normally works out, we'll go to the veteran's home, talk with them. If they have a spouse, talk to the spouse, because a lot of times they'll have maybe a little different perspective on things than the veteran would. And then they develop this biography. And so we have what we call a pre-flight meeting. That's the first time that the veterans and the guardians will meet each other.
So that's the squad level.
At the squad, first time the squad is introduced, the squad level.
So it sounds like on an average flight, there might be 10 squad leaders.
Somewhere in that range, yes.
Mm-hmm.
And the squad leader, the first time you're a squad leader, you pay $150. Mm-hmm. And then if you do multiple squad leader, if you do multiple guardian trips, then eventually it goes off to zero. Squad leader doesn't have to pay anything. And then we do very similar for the flightless. There's squad leaders, guardians. And we have a lot of our, let's say, older veterans in the villages who really would like to be a guardian, but they just don't want to be on a flight all day and all this stuff. So there's no age limit at all to be a guardian on a flightless. For the flights, you have to be no older than for your first flight. And if you've done some in the past, you can do a little bit longer. Cadre of people who like to be guardians, and we're always looking for new guardians to come in because people go out. You know, we'd like to invite your listeners, family, and friends to join us at our next homecoming. And what homecoming is when the veterans arrive back at the American Legion Post in Lady Lake. Typically, they arrive around 11:30 at night. We have entertainment starting at 9:30 at night. The next one would be October 2nd. There's a lot of entertainment going on. Bring your umbrella just in case it rains. If it pours, we will meet inside. We normally have 200 to 400 people show up in the evening, and it's really meaningful to the veterans when they start coming down 466 and they see all these people out there waving flags and lights going on. It's very emotional to the veteran, and it will be very emotional to you to come and join us.
What led you to get involved with honor flight?
Good question. I was not in the military. My father was a 25-year World War II Navy veteran, Chief Petty Officer.
Okay.
And he had, like most World War II veterans, a lot of stories about serving in the service. Now, I lived in San Diego for about 35 years, lived in Minnesota for 25 years, moved here to the villages, had never heard of honor flight before I came to the villages. I've always done volunteer work as part of my life, and I heard about this organization. I said, wow, this sounds really great. It's kind of a way to honor my father, and a lot of my family was in the military. And I had done fundraising and public speaking in my past life a lot, and so that was relatively easy for me to do. And that's why I got involved, and it's really, again, to honor all our veterans and to honor my father.
And how do people get involved in honor flight who don't have the military background?
You don't really have to. Probably 50% of the volunteers we have, no military background. Okay. Most have some kind of affinity for the military.
Sure, they're
probably friend or relative. So the easiest way, if you like to be a volunteer, if you'd like to be a guardian, if you'd like to be a veteran on a flight, is to go to our website, and it's www.villageshonorflight.org. There's a lot of information about the history of Honor Flight, the history of Honor Flight Network. There's applications you can fill out online as a veteran, as a guardian, or to be a volunteer. Now, volunteering, a lot of opportunities for volunteers. We have a club in the villages. So we have the hub that's responsible for all the flying, and we have a club that the members support all the flying and the flights. We have about 800 members right now, the club.
Wow.
We meet on the first Thursday of every month at Rohan from about 1:30 till around 3 o'clock. We normally will have a speaker. We'll talk about activities that are coming up. We will talk about fundraising monies that we've received. And there's a volunteer committee. So if you'd like to be interested, you could come to that meeting.
Again, the meeting is
the first Thursday every month on Thursday from 1:30 to 3 o'clock.
At Rohan.
At Rohan. You can fill out an application. We have a volunteer committee then that will contact you, and they will send your interest area out to the various coordinators of volunteer activities.
Is there a number that people can call?
The phone number just will go to what we call an info line, and it's answered by a company that we hire, and then that goes out to whoever would call. But I would suggest that people really go online. That's the best way to gather the information and to apply.
Repeat the website for our listeners.
Okay, it's www.org.
And is there an email address that people can send anything to? Just go to the website.
Go to the website, yes, and then someone will reach out to you.
Oh. And if you're in a hurry and it's the first Thursday of the month, 1 o'clock at Rohan.
Just come. And you don't have to be a villager to join the club and or attend the meetings.
Okay, so it's not a lifestyle club where you need a villager's ID.
Correct.
It's an open meeting.
Correct.
Anyone in from Lady Lake or Leesburg or Wildwood could just see if they want to come, see what it's all about, and see if they want to volunteer to participate. How many years have you actually been involved with Honor Flight?
Since I started about 2015, we're looking about almost 9 years.
Okay. So if there's one piece of advice you could give to your younger self in 2015, 9 years ago, from something that you learned in Honor Flight since then, what advice would you give to Duane in 2011?
I would say appreciate your life and give back as much as you can, because you get it back multiple times in rewards. We always say that the motto of Honor Flight is it's all about the vets. No one has a salary. Everybody's a volunteer. So our reward, our payback, is smiles on the veterans' faces, what they say about during the flights and afterwards. That's our reward.
Is there anything else you'd like to add, Duane?
I think that's fine.
Great. Thanks for joining us on Open Forum in the Villages.
You're welcome. Enjoyed it.
Remember, our next episode will be released next Friday at 9 a.m. Should you want to become a major supporter of the show or have questions, please contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. This is a shout-out for supporters Tweet Coleman, Ed Williams, Paul Sorgen, and major supporter Dr. Craig Curtis at K2 in the Villages. We will be hearing more from Dr. Curtis with short Alzheimer's tips each week. If you know someone who should be on the show, contact us at mike@rothvoice.com. We thank everyone for listening to the show. The content of the show is copyrighted by Roth Voice 2024. All rights reserved.